All right, Doug. Today, good morning, first of all. I want to talk about the fact that there's not been any real economic impact from all of this hysteria that's happened, all the lockdowns. It seems like we haven't actually experienced what is this wave of economic reality that must come our way. And specifically, one of the easy areas, as you can see it coming in, is with regard to housing. And the CDC has a ban on evictions. You cannot evict anyone until January 1st. If that gets if and people say if that doesn't get extended, then they'll have more evictions on January 1st than they've had ever in any single month. So there's all this pent up pressure, and where people aren't making rent payments, and eventually it has to work itself out. How do you think this goes?
Well, as Ayn Rand once said, I think I'm quoting this correctly, you can avoid reality, but you can't avoid the consequences of reality. So I think that's pretty much what they're doing. This is a variation on their previous extend and pretend philosophy that led to the collapse of 2008. So, but this is going to be bigger. It's funny. Being, in some ways, I feel like a perma bear in that, for
I think you
decades.
qualify. Yes.
Yeah, I would. I would. I mean, for just decades, I've looked at the economic situation and I said, hey, this doesn't add up. It's going to lead to a catastrophe. Now, that hasn't stopped me from actually making a lot of money in the marketplace. And people confuse these two things. I mean, have I been long? Have I been long the Dow Jones over these many years? Well, the answer is no. The closest that I've come was buying government bonds back in the early 80s when I could buy, what was I getting? I was buying like 10-year bonds at like 80 cents on government bonds, 80 cents on the dollar. It had like a 10% coupon. So I bought a lot of those then, and I held on to them for several years. I should have held them to maturity, as it turned out. But I guess that's part of the fact that I look at the economic situation, always have, and I said, this is going to end really, really badly. And it doesn't help that I've spent a lot of time reading about the collapse of Athens and the collapse of Rome and other civilizations. And I can see, you know what? The US is like on steroids in these directions. So, all right, explaining the fact that, I'm a perma bear in that. And every time that we've come to the edge of the precipice, I've thought, well, they really should. They definitely could go over the edge. And they didn't. In 1980, when interest rates were high, and they avoided it with the market meltdown of 2000, and they avoided it again with the meltdown of 2008 and 2000 to 2010. And now we're in another thing, because every time they've done something more extraordinary. I mean, quantitative easing, printing up trillions of dollars, okay? And reducing interest rates below zero, which I thought was metaphysically impossible. Well, it turned into a tax. So actually, it's not metaphysically impossible if you look at it as a tax, which it is. Okay, so now with this COVID hysteria, which they've created, which I guess some of these people think is a great thing because it increases the power, has increased the power of the state tremendously, nationally, internationally, and locally, even down to the county and small town level. Okay, so are they going to pull it out again this time and we once go back into a boom? You know what? I think this probably is the real thing. And kind of the first thing that's actually going to bring the country to reality is the fact, it's what you brought up, that, what is it? Let's get the numbers correct if possible. There's 12 million people or families, I should say, or entities, individuals and families, entities. I think it's 12 million apartments and houses, rental units that have been in forbearance for what, 9 months,
Yep.
and about, is it 5 million or
It's, they estimate,
mortgages?
yes.
Okay. Well, these numbers are so big that, rounding errors lead into six figures. But
Well, actually, no, I'm sorry. As of September 9th, 48 million households with mortgage payments were behind on their mortgage payments. As of September 9th, 48 million were behind. Not now, most of those were not in forbearance or anything like that yet, but still, that seems like a startling statistic.
yeah, it is. And when they're behind, that means that the landlord, many of them being small landlords that are trying to make their way in the world by buying a couple condos and renting them out or whatever, they've been forced to forbear, but they want their money.
They need it.
So if the guy couldn't pay for the last 9 months, how's he going to make up that difference now? Forget about future payments. How's that going to work?
Well, I shared with you this New York Times article where they were proposing some
Won't work.
solutions. I sent you this New York Times article where they were proposing some solutions. I don't know if you saw it, but one of the things in there was they said they talked about a short-term universal basic income for everybody that would help. That's one of their ideas, of course.
Of course.
That's like the easiest one, it seems like. The second one is they wanted to have, this was a more modest plan, they said. They called for the government to finance 10-year-long low interest rate loans to tenants so that they could pay back their accrued rent to the landlord and make them whole. So they want to, they offer this loan program essentially, because all the solutions are debt based, right? So it's just burden these people who are unemployed because we've shut down all the businesses that employ them. Let's burden them with some debt, but at a low interest rate, so it's fine. And so that the banks, all the money gets back to the banks. And the other thing that they said is that, and this is the thing probably concerns me the most, is they said most critically, they said there's going to be properties that hit the market, and that there's these vulture investors that are going to come and pick them up. And so, and apparently it's the 47.5 million rental units are not corporate owned. So, they're just mom and pop kind of things, so it's a huge number of rental properties that are not corporate owned. And they're like, these are going to be coming on the market. So a lot of these are going to be coming on the market eventually. It has to get liquidated. And so they say, we need a government sponsored affordable housing acquisition fund and legislation that gives it first priority to scoop up properties.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to concentrate ownership of real wealth in the hands of really rich people and the Federal Reserve, which will buy things, which is going to have even more assets that they're never going to be able to liquidate, quite frankly. So the country is actually being socialized, socialism being defined as state ownership of the means of production. And means of production, capital assets. Yeah, that's actually happening.
Well, and the two biggest areas that you can that where most Americans have captured wealth is in their home. Whether homes are overpriced and that's real or not, but they have the value in their home. And then the other part is in small businesses. And so you have this kind of dual front attack on them, basically, where small businesses are basically not allowed to operate, but large businesses are. And I shared with you that Rick Santelli, Andrew Ross Sorkin debate where they were talking about how, big box stores are totally fine, but churches are bad, and so are small restaurants, And anyway, it seems like those businesses are being totally squeezed. People pushed to the point of bankruptcy. These small businesses are just going to be gone. The benefit of that accrues to these large organizations, and which are much easier, which have unlimited access to financing, essentially from the Fed, who's willing to buy junk debt. And then on the real estate side of things, you have homeowners and who are just going to be seemingly they either have to, if you're a landlord, you're going to have to evict people, or you're going to have be foreclosed on yourself. Like those things seem they have to happen. One of those two has to happen. Has to.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, actions actually do have consequences, although a lot of times they can be delayed for quite a while. But then the interest compounds. So the forbeared, the payments, both mortgages and rental payments that were in forbearance, well, they're going to be made up, and perhaps the government will float a bond that can lend that money to these renters, who I guess will be further in debt at that point. It's questionable whether they'll be able to dismiss it through bankruptcy, much the way student loans can't be
Right.
dismissed through bankruptcy. So it's once again turning people into the equivalent of serfs, where they're actually tied down by their debt. If you have lots of debt, you have no flexibility to move or to try something new or anything. You just gotta, because you got the monkey on your back. So yeah, it's moving further in that direction. And the other thing is the guaranteed annual income payments, or what they have been getting so far, the freebies. That's taxable income. I understand. I don't know if they'll actually make it that way, but they say it's that way. So
That's
these
right.
people aren't going to be able to pay those taxes. They've already frittered it all away.
Right. And that's not just
And
with that.
even if they've gotten lucky, even if they've gotten lucky so far in the stock market, when the stock market melts down, they'll lose it all. Then what happens?
Yeah, and it's the same thing happened with we were talking earlier about these PPP loans that a lot of businesses signed up for and got. If you had decent accountants, they were all encouraging you to do this, to take this money, because it was a loan that would be forgivable, if you just met a couple basic criteria. Now that's the way it was rolled out. Over time, though, you find out more details about it. It's like the timing of when you can actually, the loan becomes forgivable, and then you have to claim income on it, and apparently that's taxable. And just it's much more, of course, way more complicated than what it looked like at first, which was just free money from the government, which of course you should always be suspicious of. There is no such thing as free money from the government.
There isn't even a free lunch. Forget about free money.
So what?
So, what I'm asking you, since I'm a certified perma bear, and I like to say I always look at the bright side of things, but I can't help seeing the dark side of things too. What's the way out of this? What do you see? I don't see any way out without really chaos, financial, economic, political, social, probably military, probably with the Chinese. So what do you think? What am I missing here?
Well,
We
obviously,
need a perma bill. We need a perma bill.
we
that
do
can
need a
give
permable.
us the bright side. Tell us. I want to know where I'm wrong. I really do. I want.
I mean, it's arguable that, I think in the short term, the consolidation of these large enterprises, the inefficient deployment of capital in these different small businesses, you know, as that gets liquidated through the system, like it actually could cause the economy to grow substantially because of the lack of. I mean, I could come up with a theory around it anyway, where that could happen, and then certainly the stock market with all the new money that's coming in would certainly could go a lot higher from here potentially. And but the problem is the social parts, I think, is where you get in real trouble, because you have along the way you've had millions of lives are devastated by this. There's just no way around it. They're just totally and utterly devastated. I mean, people who have family businesses that they've worked for 3 generations on, they, every dollar gets, because they don't get access to free money like you know BlackRock or someone like that would. So they have to put all their capital right back into the business. It's all trapped there, and then seemingly overnight, it's actually been like bled dry over about 9 months now. The business basically gets reduced to zero, where they have nothing there, and then the unintended consequences of that, so they get shut down, and so all the employees, the second and third order with the suppliers, and I just think that just you have this, you're going to have a large, desperate, the part of the population that was independent of the government, which was most people. they didn't really need the government, are going to come out of this in a state where they absolutely do need, or feel like they need the government in some way. They're not going to know what else to do. So I think that's the society problems. What I worry about.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And from the point of view of the real estate market, since all the local governments are basically bankrupt and running, lots of red ink now, thinking the way county commissioners do, they're going to raise taxes on real estate because everybody knows rich people are the ones that own the real estate.
Right.
So real estate's going to become even more unaffordable to hold on to. And when you're squeezed and you're a real estate owner, you got to cut your expenses wherever you can to pay urgent expenses. So what do? You defer maintenance. And this is why Eastern Europe and the old Soviet Union looked like Berlin in 1945, because they hadn't done any maintenance for decades and decades, because you can defer it. And so it'll be the general degradation of everything, quite frankly, for that reason. And I just don't see. Well, I see the way out. It's to all the real wealth in the world is still going to be there if we have a financial economic collapse. I mean, the buildings are not going to fall down immediately. Technologies still exist. People still have skills. That'll all still exist. So the best thing to do is what happened in the Depression after World War I, which had some similarities to this one, because then we had the Spanish flu, which in terms adjusted for the population then and the population now, the number of deaths, about 2 million Americans died, adjusted for today, the equivalent of two. I think the actual number was about 600,000 Americans died in 1919. So you had that. You had the huge readjustment after the lockdown of the economy under Wilson in World War I, but they just let it all happen. And it was fine. By 1922, the country was back into a boom again. That's what they should do. Let people become unemployed, and they'll have to figure out, listen, a lot of people be living under bridges. But then again, prices of real estate will fall tremendously, rents will fall, and people come back in at affordable rents, affordable mortgages. It'll happen. A lot of banks will fail, of course. I mean, it'll be chaos, but it will be short and get over. But they're going to drag this out, and the government is going to do more, much more. The economy is going into a catastrophe with the Democrats trying to figure out how the government will fix it. And the only way they can fix it, the way they think, is creating ever more money and more regulations to stop these things from happening and readjusting. So yeah, I'm not just a perma bear. I'm like a super grizzly bear from a comic book at this point. That's how bad it's going to be. One of those kind of grizzly bears.
Yeah, I wonder if so. What would be the plausible way that it could be steered differently? I mean, it seems to me that if the small business owners who are being effectively ruined by this, it seems like they're if they would just stop cooperating, whole cloth with all this insanity, I think maybe then you could allow, you might be a different path out. But my worry is that people just continue to go along with this. They go along with it until basically they're bled dry and driven to the point of economic desperation, where then whatever solution the government decides is going to happen is the only one. There really isn't any more. I mean, when your blood dry, you just don't, your options dissipates. Like you said, with with debt, you end up being a serf. The same thing happens. And so the people who have some capital still, the average, small business owner that has some capital, if they're just going along with closing my doors and just hoping for another PPP check or something, I just think that the disaster, we end up in the worst case scenario, I guess, if people are basically just go along and roll over and decide to just destroy their capital. I mean, they're voluntarily destroying their own capital now. It's insane.
Yeah, it is, because they're exhausting their personal savings, they're exhausting other investments outside of their business in order to keep the business open. And so and it's not just the cyclical turnover of small businesses where 5 or 10 or 15%
Hmm.
of all small business, 20% fail every year. This is the normal cycle of life, if you would. But when they all fail at once, it's not like getting a bad burn on your hand, which you'll recover from, painful as it is. It's like getting third-degree burns on 50% of your body.
Hmm.
That's different than just a bad burn on your hand, which is what the normal cycle of life was all about. So yeah, it's going to be tough. And those people in the restaurant business, if they want to stay in the food service business, well, I guess their diner or their dive or their drive-in little restaurants. I guess they're going to have to go to work for McDonald's or Popeyes if
Right.
they want to stay in the business, which is great for McDonald's and Popeyes.
Exactly. I mean, I drive by Starbucks and the lines in the drive-through is longer than I've ever seen them. They're doing great. But all the non national chains are just getting crushed by this, and there's just no way. There's just there's no way to avoid it except I think if they just stop complying with it. But they'd have to do it like en masse. Like, we're just
Yeah, but the problem is that when they don't comply, as we talked about the other day, it's for technical reasons. In other words, hey, this isn't serious enough to make me do this. No, that's not the argument you make. I'm not going to do it because you don't have the right to do it. It's my property.
right.
Instead of saying, oh yeah, it's a problem, but you've got to be more mellow about it and you got to make exceptions and maybe social distance to 3 feet, not 6 feet. No, these are you're guaranteed to lose if you make arguments like that. They're unprincipled.
You don't negotiate with terrorists.
Yeah, essentially, that's correct. Or the criminally insane, which I think accurately characterizes people like De Blasio and Cuomo in New York.
Well, just the people who have zero skin in the game, who consistently they earn their income regardless of what happens. And this is not just the politicians. I think this is a lot of people who have certain jobs. I think there was some article I read maybe a week or two ago that said, but for roughly a third of the population, the quality of life from this whole COVID thing has gone way up. I mean, all these extra things they'd have to do. The commute is now not, they can do all the work from home. Their pay is not diminished. They get Amazon delivery same day. Like it's, they get out of social engagements they weren't really interested in doing anyway, and the ones they are, they can figure out a way around it. And so for 30% of the population, it's been a huge boost to quality of life. And so those are the people.
Interesting point. Yeah.
And so
Interesting point.
these are
But
the
the people that
journalists.
actually have to do blue collar jobs and show up at the job, their quality of life has dropped
Considerably. Yeah.
tremendously, I would think. So it's a further separation of the classes in the US. Wouldn't that be the case?
Yeah. I'd say that the knowledge worker, group and government and knowledge workers basically on one side, and the people who work in the real world, making things, shaping reality with the atoms of reality are on the other side of it. And I don't think that's a good thing.
And the government has laid off nobody that I know of. I mean, air traffic has fallen, from 50 to 80%, depending. But the number of TSA employees hasn't fallen at all. There's still 75,000 of these people going through their fellow citizens' dirty underwear and asking them impertinent questions and feeling them up. I mean, they're doing just fine.
So are our teachers who refuse to teach, refuse to come to class. When they finally say, no, we got it, we're going to open up the schools, they do sick outs. The teachers do. So
True. But as I was saying earlier, I always look at the bright side. And the bright side is, hey, it's directing a lot of parents to homeschool their kids, and it's saving the kids from the indoctrination that the teachers are giving them about all kinds of irrelevant and meaningless things, like everything from global warming to the importance of this COVID hysteria to, you know, look, if I had a school age kid, I wouldn't send him to school. I'd find it, if I wanted to be a responsible parent, that is.
Yep. And this is something I had to confront personally and start homeschooling my son, who was going to a public high school. My daughter still goes to a private middle school, which has been open. They've had classes. Like that seems like that's still been a good situation for her, relatively speaking. But yeah, I agree with you, and I do think it is great that it peels back the veil on all the emperor. It's been a big emperor has no clothes period here, where you really realize how weak institutions are, how much of a fraud some of these myths that we have are, that, like, teachers are heroes, that cops are the good guys always. These are just like myths that we like to tell ourselves as a culture. I mean, they're
Yeah.
blowing up like crazy at this point.
Yeah. It's funny, all those people are government employees. Some of them doing things that they've essentially usurped from the private market. So anyway, I'd like to believe that this will be a catalyst for people to rise up, but more likely, if the government gives them enough money and enough forbearance and enough this and that and the other thing, they'll play more video games, retreat to their basement. And no, I'm afraid that our fellow Americans are mostly whipped dogs, and they're showing it.
I think so too. My hope is for the entrepreneurs and the small businesses, that they find a way to opt out of the coercion and all that. They just find some way to opt out of it. I'm not saying you have to like confront it, because that's often a terrible mistake too, right? I mean, there's no reason to confront it, but opting out in some way, like choosing not to participate in the hysteria yourself, not make it worse. Don't, no self-flagellation, it's no self-destruction.
Well, the bright side is that there are so many distortions in the financial markets today. It's going to prove a speculator's delight. It already is for those of us speculators that are involved in junior gold stocks, which have been a spectacular place to be, and much, much safer place to be, much safer than the ordinary stock market. And now I'm starting to buy oil stocks, which have been beaten down tremendously. Oil stocks are about the cheapest, absolutely or relatively, that they've ever been in history. They bounce up and down, but that's the next place that I'm looking to. So, this is great from a speculator's point of view.
Let me do a little plug there, that we put together a special report where you give away some of your favorite gold stocks. And people can get that in the description. There's a link where you can go sign up to get on our email list, and you'll get emailed that report where Doug outlines some of the gold stocks in particular that he likes. So I definitely take a look at that.
Did anybody request a copy of my
yes,
my long article on the decline and fall of the Roman Empire?
They did, and I emailed you earlier this morning. I don't know if you saw it yet, but I was just asking for it. I found it in like 5 pieces, but if you have it all put together in one place, it'll save me some time.
I have it. I'll send it to you so you can send it out to them. It's about 10,000 words, which is a pretty long read, but it's actually really good, if I do say so myself.
It's one of the best things you've ever written. Yeah, it's one of the best things you've ever written. I remember you told me about that. I think when we were in, where were we? We were in Albania, I think. I remember you telling me that you were working on it or just wrapping it up. We were looking at Frank's oil project there.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So, yeah, so I guess the last, just to kind of wrap this up, because I know you have something coming up soon. I want to know, I mean, how do you think, what's the most likely way that what happens in January? I mean, you assume that things are just going to find a way to kick the can down the road, like kick the eviction um, moratorium into the future another couple months just to get through the winter or something like that, and then just
Yes,
give
yes,
them time.
yes. I mean, they'll feel, and from a practical point of view, since they're not going to do the right thing that we've talked about, yeah, they'll keep, they'll do that.
Mm.
It'll be extend and pretend some more, and a bond to they'll work out some kind of cockamamie scheme to keep people in their houses and apartments, and make sure that for the short term the landlords don't go bankrupt. And I guess they'll figure out some way to pay the utility companies as well. They'll need to be paid, and the utility bills are pretty expensive. I think really poor people get free cell phones and free cell phone service from the government, don't they already?
And a lot of subsidized electricity and heating cost as well. Yeah.
And we'll have to look at what the food stamp situation is. I mean, it's kind of settled in around 50 million people collecting food stamps every month. Maybe that's going to go up substantially as well.
When you've seen these
Oh,
lines of people
this is
going to
going to
the,
be fascinating to watch.
you've seen some of these huge lines of people going to these food pantries, I assume, right? The
Yeah, I
you know,
have.
unbelievable, like unbelievable lines for these things I've just never seen before in my life. It's crazy.
But they're all driving pretty nice looking cars,
Uh,
all of which are leased or
yeah,
7-year financed, of course.
right. Well, one of the things, if you were, I mean, all of this, one of all the government intervention, it all leads to more problems, more distortions in the market, because what you see right now is that knowing that there's a moratorium on rent, on evictions, why would and people having uncertain economic futures because they can't work, wouldn't they be idiots to pay their rent? I mean, I know they have a contract to do it, but wouldn't
Yeah.
they be foolish to do it? Wouldn't they feel like an idiot to do it?
And if you're a builder that's building for a rental property, why would you do that? I
Right,
mean, you're inviting disaster on yourself.
right, right. Why would you ever want to be in the rental business ever? Um, yeah, why would you put more capital in that?
Of course, the banks don't care about lending money because as soon as they make a loan, unlike the old days when they had to live with that loan and know the buyer and so forth, they just package it up into a security and blow it into the market, where some poor retail mooch is going to get stuck when all those loans default.
Well, now I think the Federal Reserve, I believe, has what's the number, like $2 trillion of these mortgage-backed securities on their balance sheet, something like that.
Yeah, I was looking at that chart from the St. Louis Federal Reserve, and it had it listed. It went up to 7 or 8. Anyway, it had the highest number of what the Fed owns about $7 million of so-called assets now, but that 7 million was how many millions? So you got to multiply a million by a million to get the actual number.
Exactly.
I mean, the math becomes quite confusing. It's like in Zimbabwe, and I wish I had my $100 trillion Zimbabwe bill. That it slows you down for a minute. You got to
Started
count
count them.
the zeros, and this is a real problem in some of these countries where people think in terms of two, three, many. I mean, getting into trillions. I mean, you don't even know how to count that high with the number of zeros. A lot of these
No,
folks. So
no,
it's crazy. It's
it's
completely insane. But I'm watching it in comfort on my widescreen from a secure and pleasant location. So
and there's, as you said,
far,
plenty of speculator opportunities available if you're and so sign up if you want some of the Doug's gold stock recommendations, and I would definitely sign up for that. And then we also talked a little bit about Bitcoin in there, which is at an all-time high today. It's 20,000. What is it now? 20,500 is the last number I saw, actually. 20,684.
yeah, I think the horse has the bit in its teeth, and it's going to go for a run at this point.
So too. All right.
So
Well, we'll leave it at that, Doug, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.
fantastic, Matt.
Thanks.